everyone, welcome back to my channel, and today I am so excited to be doing this video. I don't believe I've ever done like a yearly roundup of my favorite books before, and I was thinking about how I have to do, you know, my favorite beauty products, my favorite skincare, my favorite fashion, my favorite food items of 2014, and I was like, why don't I do a whole separate video talking about some of my favorite books? Because honestly, like, I was trying to narrow it down to like 2 or 3 for that video and I couldn't do it. So what better way than to do a separate video, a whole video dedicated to some of my favorite books that I read this past year. And obviously when I'm editing this and like going back and watching this, I'm gonna think like, oh my gosh, I should have mentioned that book. Oh, I should have mentioned that book. So I'll also put some more books down in the description box. I haven't done a reading or book video in so long, and I didn't even realize that until today. And I was like, I really need to do a book video. I know a lot of you guys like reading and like the same kind of books that I do. I'm just gonna get started. I think the first one I want to mention is the one that I don't have here. And I actually don't know the author off the top of my head either, so I'll put it somewhere on the screen. But it's the Poisonwood Bible. I read it in the summer. It was one of the best books I've ever read. It really resonated with me. My mom grew up as a missionary in Indonesia and in other places in Asia, and I really liked the story. It was very sad but very realistic, and I really just liked the content and the way it was written. I really want to read more by that author, so that is definitely probably up in my top 5 of my favorite books that I've ever read, let alone in my favorites of 2014. So now let's get into more books, shall we? First, I am going to mention Jackdaws by Ken Follet. Not necessarily just this book, but I more want to talk about Ken Follet because I really fell in love with him this year and the year before. I don't even remember really reading this, to be honest, but I really like his writing, and so that's why I wanted to mention him more than just this book. This book is good, but I just like his writing. So Ken Follet is definitely one of my favorite authors. I find his books like kind of challenging, but just really interesting, and they definitely take a different perspective than a lot of other books that I read. This takes place during the Holocaust, during World War II, so you can see the swastika there. So, good book. Another one, this is Mrs. Kimble by Jennifer Haigh. I don't know how to say her last name. Basically, this book is kind of one of those relationship books, but it has that twist which you don't often get. If you stick to a certain theme of book, it'll become really repetitive, and so I kind of thought like, oh, this is gonna be like an easy read, but it was so shocking. Like, I did not expect the result that happened. I really like books that jump from one person's perspective to another. I find that very captivating. It's basically about a series of affairs, but they all kind of come back together in the end and connect. So very interesting, really recommend for a good lighter read, but still with some serious substance. This one is kind of a, in my house, a controversial book because some of us really loved it and some of us did not like it at all. And I like reading the same books as my parents because then we can talk about them after and I can recommend them books. And this is A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I'm 99% sure I mentioned this in a favorites video throughout the year. This also jumped between 2 people's perspectives, one living on Vancouver Island, which is very close to where I live, and one living in Japan, which, another thing about me, I've always been like ridiculously fascinated by Japanese culture. I learned a little bit of Japanese in elementary school, and I learned about Japanese culture and everything. I was really excited to read this because of that reason. This is kind of a twisted, darker book. There were some pretty like serious themes, I would say, in this book, like rape and prostitution and so on, but at the end of the day, oh, and lots of abuse. Like, connections that they have together without ever meeting are it's very interesting. I would recommend it. I'm doing a bad job describing it, but it's a good book. I would recommend this one. I'm pretty certain I mentioned this one as well throughout the year. This is The Girl Who Saved the King of Sweden by Jonasson, and I love this author. He wrote The 100-Year-Old Man Who Fell Out the Window and Disappeared or something like that. I don't know. And I liked that one, and I was like, okay, I gotta read this one. And I honestly like this one way more. I love this book. If you want something humorous but kind of like dark humor, I don't very often laugh out loud in movies or books or anything like that. I usually laugh a lot more like when I'm with people, like actual people, not like a movie. But this made me laugh out loud, and it takes a lot for me to laugh out loud in a book, and I loved this. I would totally recommend it. It's a funny book with substance and an interesting plot. A lot of it seems really like that could never happen, but it's so funny. So definitely check this one out if you want something a little bit funnier. Next, we have something that I kind of want to do an honorable mention, because I don't want to necessarily say that this has been like my favorite book of 2014, because honestly it probably wasn't my favorite book of 2014 or one of the top 5 even. But I did read it, and I feel like that's quite the achievement, because I always kind of looked at it when it was sitting on my parents' shelf, even when I was younger, and I'd be like, holy cow, that's literally the same size as a Bible. And I read it this past summer when I was in Boston. I brought this with me, which was kind of a dumb idea because it literally weighs like 10 pounds. But I read Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. It's also a movie with Keira Knightley, and I believe that really attractive man, which I can't remember his name, but he's married to a 40-year-old woman, which really turns me off, but he's still cute. So watch that movie if you don't want to read the book, because I totally get it. There were times when I was reading this where I was like, maybe I should just stop, because like it was honestly really boring in the beginning, and there were sections of the book where he would go on talking about farming or something like that for like 10 or 15 pages, and it would be so detailed, but it had nothing really to do with the actual plot. It was sort of just like details. For any of you who want to challenge yourselves, I think I was kind of feeling like I really needed a challenge book-wise, so I picked this up, and it was definitely a challenge, not only to read, but also just to hold, because it's heavy. So enjoyed that quite a lot. These next 5, not to like get you really excited, are some of my probably all-time favorite books that I've ever read. I didn't want to do this in any order because these all are amazing, but I'm just gonna say like some of the books I'm about to mention are amazing, and if you haven't read them, do yourself a favor and do read them. Even if you aren't into reading, like when you find a book that resonates with you and like you can relate to the characters or the situation, I think it really opens your eyes and makes you want to read and makes you more interested in the book itself. So I'm really excited to share with you guys the next book, because this is something that my whole family read, we all fell in love with, and we all were captivated by the story. And I have talked about this one before. This is We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves by Karen Joy Fowler. I read this because my dad told me that this is one of his favorite books, and as soon as one of my family members says that, I'm like, okay, gotta read it. Especially my dad, because my mom reads really quickly, and a lot of the time she can't even remember what she read, which is funny because she reads so much. But my dad is more of a slower, takes his time and really gets into the book, which I feel like I'm kind of like that. I'm kind of in the middle. So this is an amazing book. It's really, really heartwarming. It's also heart-wrenching. Basically everything that involves the heart happens. It's just a really interesting novel, and I don't want to give anything away, but it follows one girl through her adult life, and if she does a lot of flashbacks, which I really like the flashbacks because it helps with like kind of creating a better story, a more well-rounded story. Shows her dealing with the loss of her sister. I'm not gonna say any more. Definitely read this, check it out. It's awesome. I highly recommend it. This is another one of my favorites. When you see like winner of da-da-da-da on a book, sometimes it's like, oh, I gotta read that because it's a winner. But then sometimes it's a letdown, and this wasn't. This is the Canada Read 2009 selection, blah blah, who cares about that, but it's the winner of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Best Overall Book, and it's a #1 national bestseller. This is the Book of Negros by Lawrence Hill. This is an amazing book. I think I mentioned this as well. I feel like I mentioned a lot of books briefly in my favorites videos, but this one looks at a lady kind of looking back on her life, and she lives in England, and she's probably like in her 80s or 90s, and she's very old, and she looks back on her life as a child being abducted from her village in Africa and basically taken to, I believe she starts down south in America and then travels up to New York, and how she literally can't even believe that she got through all the things that she's gone through. I really like to read books on slavery because it really opens your eyes, and realizing that this still happens some places in the world, the way that people were treated is just horrible. And anyways, it's an amazing book, definitely awesome. So moving on, this is one I think I also mentioned. I feel like I mentioned a lot of these. Anyways, this is Mr. Pip by Lloyd Jones. I found this in my house and no one in my family had read it, so I was like, this is kind of weird. Normally, you know, we read the books that we own. But basically this is the winner of the Commonwealth Writers Prize for Best Book and a finalist for the Man Booker Prize, which I always kind of think the Man Booker Prize is like, that's a big deal right there. The beginning was kind of weird, and then everything happened all at once, and it was amazing. Amazing, 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 and conclusions that you wouldn't think that it would come to, and just an amazing book. I highly recommend this, and I totally recommend it for those of you who like books that kind of doesn't seem like anything's going on, but then at the very end it's like, that explains everything. Like, I love that. Thank you for having conclusions that make sense. But this one didn't even have a conclusion that really made sense, just had a good conclusion. So check this one out if you're looking for a good one. I feel like this is like, just the cover is really nice. Good job on your cover artwork, mister. Getting down to the final two, let's talk about this book here, which I have to just remind myself of what this is about. Oh my gosh, this one. This book is by Sumunk Kid, which, if you know The Secret Life of Bees, it's a movie and it's also a book. She wrote that, and this is her newer book, and it's The Invention of Wings. Oprah's book club, hello. Everyone loves Oprah, especially me, so this is an amazing novel. I love, like I said, books on slavery, very, very fascinating to me. It kind of intertwines fiction with actual events that have happened in history, and I love that because then there's actually a sense that this could have actually happened. Like, you don't know, it could have actually happened because a lot of the facts in here and a lot of the events are real. Basically, there is a white family who has like this basically collection of slaves, and one of the daughters, Zara, kind of is against this whole slavery concept and doesn't really like the idea of it. She's always kind of been the odd one out in her family, doesn't quite agree with what everyone else in her family agrees with, and kind of follows her side of the story, and then the slave, Haigh, how they come together eventually to plan an escape. Zara is white and has so many opportunities, but yet she's challenging her status quo and her the stereotypes that are set for her, while Haigh is doing the same thing, but obviously in a more confined way because she's a slave. So it's very interesting, and I definitely recommend it. I really like this author. I actually like this way more than Secret Life of Bees. I just found it more, like I could connect with it more, and I read this in I think like 3 days. I loved it that much, so definitely check this one out. Last, but definitely not least, one of my favorite books of all time, and I wanted to save this one for last because it is probably my favorite book of 2014. But all of these books are amazing, and I probably am going to think back and be like, no, Emily. It's between this one and the Poisonwood Bible. It's between those two for me because those two were the most like, oh my gosh, eye-opening and amazing books. But this is All My Puny Sorrows by Miriam Toews. I loved this book. I read this on the bus going to school because I read this while I was in school for my last semester. Probably wasn't the best idea because it's a pretty dark themed book. Like, there's dark themes. Basically, it's about two sisters. They're a Mennonite, which I have a Mennonite background as well. Yolandi and Elf, and Yolandi is a sister. It kind of takes through her perspective, and her sister Elf is this like world-renowned, everyone knows her, pianist, and she plays all over the world, and Yolandi kind of is just, she's kind of broke. She has 2 kids, she's a single mom, and Elf is suicidal and continuously tries to commit suicide, whereas Yolandi is trying to like basically plead with her sister to like stay with her. And if you have a sister, if you have siblings at all, this situation is so heartbreaking to read about because you can relate to it, like you really can. Or not even necessarily having someone suicidal in your family, but that need to have your sibling with you. I read this on the bus, like I said, and I literally was crying on the bus like every day because it was so emotional for me. Like, and there are lots of quotes in this book that I could take from and really like live by and really be able to relate to. And I think the cover is on upside down. That's probably me. Overall, amazing, and if you want something that's eye-opening, this is such an amazing book. I can't stress it enough. Definitely check this out. It's worth buying. So that concludes my 2014 favorite books. I can't believe that this year is over and that I've read so many amazing books. Definitely one of the best book years I've had ever that I can remember. I just read a lot of like award-winning books, but also books that really resonated with me and I felt really like connected to, and plots that were fascinating and kept me hooked the whole way through. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know down below some of your favorite books this year and I'll definitely check them out. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye.